everybody. My name is Susan Holman Waters. I am married to Asa Waters II, who built this beautiful mansion. We hope to spend our first Thanksgiving in this mansion this year. For now, though, I would like to take you back to 1774. Please use your imagination and go back with me. It was a terrible time in North Parish, Sutton. Millbury had not become a town yet, so we were North Parish, part of the town of Sutton. And at that time, everybody was anxious, nervous, and upset because the King of England had decided that he needed to recoup a lot of money for all the wars he had been involved in. So he decided he would get that money from the colonists in America. He put taxes with the help of Parliament on everything we bought. And we still were buying many, many things. All of our dishes to eat with, a lot of our material for our clothes, even our food. In fact, one thing that we were very angry about is the tax on tea. And you might have heard what happened in Boston. Some of the patriots in Boston got onto a ship that was loaded with tea and dumped it all into Boston Harbor. When the King of England heard about that, he was extremely angry, and he passed what was called the Massachusetts Government Acts. And this act was devastating to us. We had had a charter and we were ruling ourselves for 80 years. All of a sudden, he revoked the charter and he says you can no longer rule yourselves. You will have to be ruled by General Gage down in Boston. If you want to have a town meeting, you check with him. Whatever you want to talk about at your town meeting, you ask him if it's all right. Well, of course, that upset the people up here in Massachusetts very much because we had been ruling ourselves for 80 years. So we started to have meetings to decide what to do about these laws. The first thing we decided is we will not buy any more things from England. We will try and produce all of our own things. The next part of this law that really upset us was the king said, that he would be appointing all of the judges that would come in to our area of Massachusetts to conduct court. Well, we were very frightened of that because we all had farms and we thought those judges would come in, they would find us guilty, put us in jail, take our land, and that would be the end. So we had to do something about these judges coming into our courthouse. We had various meetings where people from all around Worcester County went to Worcester Convention meetings and decided, no way are these judges going to conduct court in our courthouse. So when Worcester heard that 20 judges were coming up here to conduct court on September 5th, 1774, Worcester asked all militiamen in all the towns around Worcester to come to Worcester and to stop those judges. We sent from Sutton 500, twice as many as any other town, including Worcester. And when our militiamen got to Worcester, the best part was they lined up on both sides of Main Street between the Haywood Tavern and the courthouse. And in the Haywood Tavern, the judges were relaxing. Well, our officers went down to the tavern, got those judges out, made them all stand on the Main Street with their hats in their hands, and they had to walk down between the militiamen, 5,000 militiamen, and say, we renounce the laws of King George. We will not conduct court in your courthouse. We will leave the city, never to return. And that's what happened. That was a revolution because we got rid of all British power at that time, and we had given the power back to the people. So they left, and after they left, we were in charge. Now, how do we know this really happened? Well, a few years ago, a historian went to the American Antiquarian Society in Worcester, found a diary that listed what happened that day, all the numbers of militia, and on the second page was a very exciting thing that we enjoyed seeing. It said, Reverend Chaplain among. That meant that our Reverend from North Parish, up in Old Common at the Lord's Barn, was there to support our militiamen and to pray with them. He was our pastor through the entire Revolution. Now you are going to get to meet 4 patriots who were involved in 1774 Revolution. The first one will be Amos Singletary. You can of course guess where he lived, and he had the first mill up there, which was a grist mill, which is pictured on our town seal. The next one you will meet will be Asa Waters the First. He had his gun-making business up on Rhodes Street. If you take a ride up there, it's right near Waters Court, which joins Rhodes Street. That's where he had his business. He was also asked to make gunpowder for all of Worcester County, which he did up there as well. The next one you will meet is my father, Colonel Jonathan Holman. He grew up in West Millbury. He had a sawmill up there and an oil mill. He was an officer in the French and Indian War and a colonel during the Revolution. And last but not least, you will meet Reverend Ebenezer Chaplin. Please go along with the maid, and she'll be glad to introduce you to our patriots. Thank you for coming.
Allow me to introduce myself. I am Squire Amos Singletary. I was born and was the very first white male born in Sutton in 1721. My father's home was at the Crooked Pond, at the outlet of the Crooked Pond, near what is today the West Millbury Fire Barn. It later became known as Lake Singletary after I demised in 1806. My education was relatively rudimentary, since I learned both or all of the basics in writing, math, and reading at home. However, I was very astute and took the opportunities that I had, and by my adult years, I became well informed, and others believed I had sound judgment. We Singletaries became known for introducing industries into this area of the world. The areas we talked about first was a grist mill for flour, and a second was the sawmill. These businesses, obviously ended up changing the routes and roads and the meadows to be transforming the section of this area of the town. In the time in which the North Parish wanted to become a precinct from Sutton, I pushed for that effort to be done. And we posted the signage for the town meeting for this purpose at the Wheeler Village, or the Mayo Mill number 2, which is today the S&D spinning mill. And from there, the industries of our communities began to thrive and flourish. So much so that in 1793, I became involved in the pursuit of trying to create a new town, separate from Sutton, in order to be able to reflect the growth of industries in this North Parish. Although I was not alive when this occurred, we were indeed able to eventually make this happen in 1813, as I've mentioned. I'm not ashamed to say that I was a very earnest Christian. I met my wife and married her, Mary Curtis, in 1742. We became very much involved in creating a church in the North Parish, and we became pillars of the Lord's barn in a location where you mostly know today as the Old Common. We eventually had 2 sons and 7 daughters, and throughout the town we became related to so many of the well-known families of the community: the Stockwells, the Goodells, the Gales, the Burnaps, the Dwinells. We were married during the time called the Religious Revival, called the Great Awakening. At that particular time, the Reverend Jonathan Edwards himself came to Sutton and visited our community. He was well known for letting the people understand that we had become far too consumed with worldly matters. And so when he spoke, "God is an angry judge, and humans are sinners," many were completely enthralled by his message, his fury, his conviction. And they, therefore, became very much in favor of this man, bringing forth moral sentiment. I became involved in the unpleasantness with Mother England. In the late 1760s and early 1700s, by becoming a member of the Sutton Provincial Congress. We made it clear that we were very much in favor of the Patriots' cause. We promoted acts that forbade the importation of goods from England and the English colonies in order to make sure that we were not supporting what we considered to be those wrongs pursued by Britain. In 1774, I was proud to be one of 500 participants from Sutton, which at that time included parts of Grafton, Oxford, Millbury, and Ward, which today you know of as Auburn. During this particular time, 4,600 Central Massachusetts militiamen lined the streets of Worcester, and we prevented the newly appointed judges from taking control of the courts. This became known and is now being celebrated as the bloodless revolution of 1774. Well, by the time the actual revolution occurred, I was a mite old to be doing the soldiering, but I was still a fighting man. And so I went along and did everything that I could to talk about the evils that were being spent upon us by the British. I helped equip a company of men and also spent a fortune on the cause of the American independence. Perhaps my greatest accomplishment was when I was a delegate to the Massachusetts ratifying convention of the new nation's Constitution in 1788, by the time we convened. It was a grave concern to me that we were accepting a constitution that essentially had forgotten about the causes of the rift between England and the colonies. I became very concerned that this constitution was creating a king, an overbearing authority. His Highness George Washington? I think not. I became concerned that the Constitution itself was insufficient in protecting the individual liberties that we sought to gain through all that we did in the fighting for our independence. I was an anti-federalist. And I gave a speech that I believed helped in some small way to help bring about a Bill of Rights to our Constitution. And in this speech I said, if the Constitution had been brought to our attention in 1775, we would have thrown it out. Nay, we probably would have not even looked at it. Consider the fact that the Constitution is creating in so many ways so much that we were concerned about at the time we were fighting for independence. What was that chiefly? The right to be taxed and to be bound by all acts whatsoever. We were told that this new Congress would not be taxing us. However, here we have these lawyers, these moneyed interests who were sitting there in Congress or writing a constitution, giving the right to be able to tax. We were very concerned that this right would overwhelm us. I believed that these very individuals who not only wrote the document but were looking to become managers of this document would lead us and take us, small little people, and we would be swallowed up like the great Leviathan. Mary and I were both buried at the County Bridge Cemetery along the Blackstone River at a location today many of you call Goretti's. Please, go by, check our grave marker, and remember us. Thank you.
Good day to you. My name is Asa Waters, and I am proud to be speaking with you in the home of my son and namesake, Asa II, and his wife Nancy, whom you have previously met. As you know, they began building their lovely mansion in 1826, moved in 1829, but it was not until Christmas Day of 1832 that they held a formal open house for the local citizenry, not only of Millbury, but of the area. Anyone who attended would have viewed one of the finest and stateliest mansions in the whole country, for they spared no expense in building this beautiful mansion. They purchased only the finest materials from Europe and North and South America. As for myself, I was born on January 27th, 1742, the son of Jonathan and Mehitable Waters, who settled on about 1,500 acres of land in the Grass Hill area of the North Parish of Sutton. He inherited that land from his father, who actually purchased the land and never moved to Sutton. I saw some strange looks when I mentioned the name Mehitable. Is that no longer a common name? No. Do any of you know what it means? No, it actually means God rejoices. And certainly God would have rejoiced for my mother, for she not only was a wonderful woman, but a fine Christian. While I'm asking questions, one other one I'd like to ask you is, do any of you know what Sutton means? Actually, it's from the Anglo-Saxon, and it means South Town. So Millbury originally would have been the North Parish of the South Town. Our family homestead was in the Grassy Hill area of the North Parish, going westward after you leave Lake Singletary. On top of the hill, today there is a stately pillared house right across from McGrath Road, which is approximately where our homestead was. As an adult, my wife Sarah and I moved to the corner of Rhodes and West Main Street, where we raised our 9 children. I was destined to continue the long family tradition of gun making, which began in England long before our forebears emigrated to the United States, first in the 1600s to Salem, Massachusetts, and then on to Sutton in the 1700s. My brother Andrus and I operated a small armory on Singletary Stream. We purchased the water rights from Captain Abaya Burbank so that we could create a flume in which we could have a strong flow of water, whereby we could actually use water power to help us in the making of our metal parts for the guns. Once we had the metal parts, we would assemble them with the wooden parts and the stock, and would later become known as the Millbury musket. We also made size and other metal parts in the armory as well. My brother Andrus, who was my partner in this, had the most difficult of the two parts, for he had to gather the pig iron. In order to do that, he had to travel to Salisbury, Connecticut, to the mines there, and then transport that pig iron to Douglas, Massachusetts, across very rough terrain in order to have it refined, and then he had to cart it onto our small armory on Road Street. Unfortunately for my brother Andrus, he died after 2 years from exposure in the mines, and I had to carry on the family business by myself. Our family business soon became instrumental in the American Revolutionary War. For in 1774, we got word from Boston that King George and the British Parliament had revoked our charter. We were not pleased at all, for we were used to governing ourselves, and we did no longer wanted to have the British Parliament and the King tell us how to govern ourselves and lead our lives. It was bad enough that they were taxing us, and they continued to put new taxes upon us. So we reacted in two ways. First, we created a commission of inspection, of which I was a member. Our goal was to stop the flow of tax money from the colony to the British government. The way we did this was by watching our fellow citizens very closely. And those who purchased heavily taxed items from England were sought by us. And what we did is that we would catch them, we would fine them, and once that was done, no one would hire them, and we would put their names in the newspaper. Essentially, we had ostracized them from our society. And in any small town, as you know, ostracism is not a very pleasant thing. And so most learned to live with us. Those who didn't had a very difficult time or actually left the area. The other thing we did was on September 7th, 1774, we got the call that all the area militiamen were going to meet in Worcester and make a show of force before the British rule there. So about 5,000 of us from all over the county went to the main street of Worcester, created a gauntlet along Main Street. The British judges who were in a tavern were forced out and made to walk between all those of us who were creating the gauntlet. And then they had to recant their allegiance to the British crown. And that was the last time, after that day, that any British rule ever existed in Worcester County. It was a joyous event and one that we were so proud to be involved with. Unfortunately, the next event was not so bloodless. 7 months later, in April of 1775, we got a call from Lexington and Concord that the Redcoats had invaded them. As you know, back then, we were not able to get there very quickly, but we formed up. Myself, who was a lieutenant in the militia of the North Parish, and 5 other companies from Sutton, found our way there as quickly as possible. But we were too late for any of the action. The skirmish was over. When we returned to our homes, I resolved not to fight anymore as a militiaman, but to take on full-time pretty much the job of making the guns and the gunpowder with which we could fight the revolution, as much as we did not want to do that. I've already explained to you how we made the guns. The other part of this was obviously gunpowder, because what good is a gun without gunpowder? I had often said that I must have broke my back under every barn in Worcester County in order to find the materials for gunpowder. That was called saltpeter. And saltpeter is actually potassium nitrate, which is the main ingredient in gunpowder. And the reason I bent my back under every barn was because I was scraping up the cow manure under all those many barns from which I gathered all this material. We brought it to our gun making facility, also on Singletary Stream, once again using water power to grind up that material so that it would be usable. At some point, when my sons, Asa II and Elijah, became old enough and qualified enough, they took on the responsibilities of the armory and the gunpowder making. I instead built a beautiful home on Elmwood Street, right near the Elmwood Street School, and became the deacon of the Lord's Barn up in Old Common. I got to sit in the high chair in front of the pastor, and from then on I was always known as Deacon Waters. It was law then that on Sunday everyone was required to attend church, and it was a full day event. So for me, living so close to the Lord's Barn, I was able to go up in the morning, go to my home for lunch, and then return for the afternoon. Probably not very much different than you find people do today. I'm sure you all spend all day in church as we did on Sundays. I was fortunate enough to have lived long enough to see the town of Millbury incorporated in June of 1813. I died that following November and am now presently entombed in the beautiful West Millbury Cemetery along with many of my relatives. I had one final surprise in 1912 when my great-great-grandson, the President of the United States, William Howard Taft, visited my grave. I had always thought how fortunate it was for the Waters family to have grown and had such a fruitful existence in the North Parish of Sutton and then in Millbury. And that was the final testament to my feelings on that. So as you walk through the remainder of this stately mansion, please enjoy what my son and daughter-in-law created, for it was truly one of the finest in the whole time. You will also, in the next room, be able to see one of the Millbury muskets that we created in our armories. Thank you very much for coming.
Good day, fellow colonists. 'Tis good to see you. I am Colonel Jonathan Holman. I was born here in this North Parish of Sutton in 1732, and I died here in this parish, now called Millbury, in 1814. But as you can see, I never left. My father Solomon settled here in 1726. He settled in an area you now refer to as Old Historic West Millbury. It was there between Ramshorn Pond, a fine sheet of water, and Singletary Stream that he located his farm. He did so because the soil was rich and there was much water power to power equipment. It was quite industrious up there at that time. In fact, young Thomas Blanchard developed his famous duplicating lathe there. Can you imagine turning irregular objects, such as a gun stock, fashionably time after time? Yes, a copy of his lathe is down at the Smithsonian that you can see, along with his likeness on a mural. He, along with 6 other gentlemen, are called the 7 great inventors of the world. And yes, Ben Franklin is one of them. In 1755, myself and my friend Ebenezer Learned, and others went off to the French and Indian War. We spent much of the time in the Lake George region between Fort Ticonderoga and the Indian territory known as Iroquois. Those were tough, desperate times. We hardly had food or water. There was disease, it was prevalent everywhere, and the woods were thick with the enemy. You know, after those long battles, we all came back. We were fortunate. We came back with all our hair. Many did not, because those savages would take your scalp as a trophy of war. When I came back home, I married Hannah Sibley. That was in 1763. She bore me 6 sons and 3 daughters. Many of my sons later moved to the northern part of Massachusetts seeking land. Who can blame them? That northern part of Massachusetts is now referred to as Maine. They moved in an area close together, and they referred to it as Holmanville at the time, but you would know it as Dixfield now. Yes, in 1774, roughly, you know, after some good quiet times around here, we got sick of the king's tyranny and his taxation. Taxation without representation. Something you ought to be concerned about today. So, we participated in Worcester's bloodless revolution. Yes, that was sometime 500 of us from Sutton joined 4,500 others to kick those king's tyrants out without firing a shot. By now you've heard enough of that. The commanding general in Boston, General Gage, he did not march on Worcester because he feared we were too well armed. And we were. And still are. So, he marched on the tiny hamlets of Concord and Lexington. We were incensed. My friend Ebenezer and I joined together for the cause. I organized the 5th Massachusetts Regiment and was designated as colonel. Yes, we Sutton boys did our area proud and our town proud. We participated in 1775 at Bunker Hill. Then we went on to White Plains in 76. We fought at Bennington in 77, and later that year we were at Saratoga. Yes, that's where we were part of the battle, where General Burgoyne and the entire British Army failed and had to lay down their arms. We saw it with our own eyes. The general later went back to England and lived the rest of his life in disgust. Those were tough, desperate times as well. We were always weary from the march, and food was scarce. I remember holding a pork rind in my mouth for 3 days and did not swallow it for fear I would not get another. Well, although the greater conflict was not over, my wartime experience came to an end. Boy, we all longed for the comforts of home. When I came home, I was constantly asked to be on committees, which I did. I served on many committees, but I much prefer the battle of war than that of politics. At least you know who your enemies are. In my comforts back home, I lost my Hannah and later married Susanna Trask. Susanna bore me 2 girls and 1 boy. One of the girls, my Suki, you met. She's the woman who met you and greeted you here this evening. Yes, she married Asa Water II, who built this fine mansion. I always told my girls, it's just as easy to marry a man with a shilling as one without. And of course, today, I would tell my girls, don't ever date below your credit score. Yes, time goes on. I often visited my boys up in Maine, but always longed to come back to Sutton. You know, in 1786, I went out to help quell Shays' Rebellion. I remember it well, going out between Amherst, those foothills between Amherst and Granby, down a winding path, finding this enormous cave where many men and horses could ride. I met the men there. And although I sympathized in their plight, I had high hopes for our new nation. Well, I always wanted to come back to my farm, and that's where I enjoyed myself the most. It's up on what you now know as Fellman Road in West Millbury. And it was there, February 25th, 1814, that my earthly sojourn came to an end. It was a cold, bitter winter, so they could not inter my remains right away. They put me in an earthen works that are still there today. When the season came around, they were able to bury me. Several years later, they wanted to remove my remains and move them to the Central Cemetery, but I would not go. Yes, they built a monument in my name down there anyway. Boy, it seems so long ago. Did I mention my exploits in the war? Oh, yes, I guess I have. And you've probably heard enough for me. So, fare thee well, my friends. And please remember to visit me at either of my resting places.
I graduated from Yale in 1763 and moved to Sutton to study under Reverend Hall, who was the pastor of the Sutton Senate Church. In 1764, when the North Parish was formed, I was asked to take that position, which I did. As pastor, I continued my studies and received my master's degree in 1767. My wife and I enjoyed living in the red old colonial house at the top of Elmwood Street. And there we raised our 9 children, raised our 9 children. And this house was located next to the Lord's barn. As pastor of the North Parish, I took part in the daily activity of most of my parishioners. I would visit the sick. I would help them write legal documents. and I would help resolve family disputes. My parishioners, if they committed sins, were expected to give me notes of confession. And among these notes of confession were for drunkenness, or if they failed to attend church on the Sabbath day, or many other things, too many to mention. I was forced to report these transgressions to the local court, and if they were found guilty, they had to pay a fine. As pastor, I was also expected to provide for my family, which I did as a farmer, and I enjoyed my duties as a farmer. I grew my own produce. I grew apples and made cider. I sold wood and walnuts and tended to my farm animals. In 1774, as you have been told, the Massachusetts Government Act produced several, appointed 38 judges to act. They were all Tories. Tories were individuals who were supporting the king. The militiamen from North Parish were invited to go to Worcester to prevent the judges from taking their seat, and I accompanied them and went along with them. My name is inscribed in Reverend Parkman's diary as being among the militia. In addition to that, I was present at the Worcester conventions. I opened and closed several of the meetings. The Worcester conventions were presumably designed to try and address the problems that were resulting from the Massachusetts Government Act and from the other legislation. I was involved in that and heartily supported their actions. Worcester was at the heart of this activity. The North Parish was my home for 30 years, and my wife and I lived there. Of our 9 children, we buried 4 of them and my wife. These Ichabod and Anna died as infants. My wife at 50 years old, Mary at 23 years old, and Aaron at 19. They're buried in the Dwinell Cemetery, which is located on McCracken Road. I had planned to remain as pastor of the Lord's Barn for my entire life, but a black cloud fell over us starting in 1790. It had to do with a family dispute over which I had full authority. A young man had fallen in love with Mary and had come and asked for her hand in marriage. My wife and I both strongly opposed the union, and we told him to bring the letters that he had received from Mary back, and we would give him his letters that he sent to her. He returned on the next day, but without the letters, and told us that he had spoken to Deacon Asa Waters and Deacon Jonathan Waters, and they had supported him. And that Justice of the Peace Singletary said that he would come if there was some kind of intercession that was needed. There was even talk among the parishioners of getting a horse and taking Mary away forcefully. This was an insult to me and an attack on my person and our family. I had every right as a father to dispose of my daughter as I saw fit. However, this did not sit well with members of the congregation. Members of the congregation felt that I was headstrong and had acted boldly. Some even said that I should be arrested and put in jail for false imprisonment. Sadly, Mary died, and many of the congregation said that she died of a broken heart. The church council held meetings at which many had asked that I be removed as pastor and that the doors of the church be closed to me. They said that I did not attend to my pastoral duties, which was wrong. And in 1792, however, the doors to the church were closed to me, and I was removed. I requested that ministers of the surrounding towns come and speak against the ordination of Reverend Joseph Goff, who was my predecessor. And I argued that the people, the parishioners of the First Congregational Church of Sutton had hired me, and therefore the parishioners of the North Parish had no right in closing the door of the church to me. In any event, I took my case to the Court of Common Pleas, and they listened to me, but they found against me. I then took my case to the Superior Court, and they found against me as well. For many years, I steadfastly remained in my home on Elmwood Street, near the Lord's Barn, which was my church, and across the street, actually, from Reverend Goff, whose house was located where Elmwood Street and Carlton Road merge. I kept all the church records myself. I had collected them for over 30 years. Many of the councilors came and asked me for the records, and I refused to give them the records. These were the historical records of the First Congregational Church in Millbury. In 1803, I left and moved to Hardwick and lived with my daughter Susan and her family, where I died. A historian at Hardwick described me as tall, well-framed, and athletic, and wearing one of the last to wear a wig, cocked hat, and breeches. My feeling for the North Parish softened over the years, and I began to realize that my downfall was the result of my own lack of compassion for my daughter and for my parishioners. Eventually, I realized my greatest achievement was becoming pastor of the Lord's Barn. For when I died in 1822, I had inscribed on my tombstone, the Reverend Ebenezer Chaplain, former pastor of the 2nd Parish in Sutton. And